Hi there, and welcome to Plant CEO. In today's episode, I'd like to welcome Rich Kelleman, the founder and CEO of Bonds Pet Food. Hi, Rich. How are you doing?
Good, Annette. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. And you're joining us from Boulder in Colorado.
That's right. Yeah. I'm today, as I should be. I'm working from home. So just so you and everyone else is aware, if you hear little barks and growls and meows, that's why I've got some furry ones around me today.
Yeah, it's always good to hear the animals in the background, especially if you're a pet food company.
Exactly.
So great. So do you want to start by telling me a little bit more about Bonds Pet Food, first of all?
Yeah, sure. So we are working with biotechnology to make pet food from cultured protein, including proteins like turkey, chicken, and fish without the animal. And how we're going about doing that is we're working with a process called microbial fermentation. It's an approach that's been used for decades to make everything from enzymes for cheese manufacture to good bacteria for probiotic supplements or even the heme protein in the delicious Impossible Burger. We're just reassembling that process to more efficiently and responsibly harvest high quality meat proteins and then use that as the foundation of our complete recipes. And why we're doing this is for a host of reasons. I think it's no surprise that the production of meat comes with a host of challenges, whether it's farm animal welfare or sustainability. All the land, water, and energy that's required to produce a kilogram of meat protein isn't insignificant. And then from a safety perspective, there's, with processing of meat, there's a lot of risk of pathogen contamination, whether that's Salmonella, Listeria, E. coli. And since we're brewing this meat essentially in a controlled setting, we can mitigate most of that danger and most of those downsides.
Yeah. And has those pathogens been found in previous traditional forms of pet food?
Oh yeah. Just like the human food industry, maybe even more so, just because it's harder to trace a lot of the meat based ingredients that are found in pet foods. There's routine recalls of Salmonella, Listeria, E. coli. Also, a little less usual, but it happens. There are things that show up in the pet food supply chain, like the drug that basically euthanasia drug to put down dogs and cats. That's because some of the meat proteins that are used in many pet food recipes are meat meals and rendered meats. And so the source of a lot of those, and the origin of those meats aren't always easy to trace, and they may come from zoo animals that have been put down. Perhaps this has happened in the past from companion animals that have been put down. They find their way into a rendering plant and facility. Again, less common, but unusual things tend to find their way into the mix. And obviously,
so the drug was given to potentially a zoo animal who passed away.
exactly.
It still remains in the meat that ends up in the pet food, is what you're saying.
Exactly. And there have been recalls for some really big brands in finding traces of that. So those are the things that, since we're basically brewing our meat protein in a controlled setting, that just can't happen, right? We know exactly what we're brewing, we're making, we're producing, that will find its way as a high quality input and the foundation into a dog and cat's diet.
Yeah. And obviously with this year's pandemic, there was cases where meat that was not, was in a plant where there was COVID outbreaks was not ordered fit for human consumption, but they have decided to use that for meat consumption. Pet food. What do you feel about that when that also happens?
Yeah, and that's pretty routine as well. A lot of meat byproducts and B grade meats, right, are often used in many pet foods. And in a way that's good, right? Because that isn't going to waste. they're, if you're looking at it from life cycle analysis, that's not a horrible thing to happen. But even, I guess there's one thing that I should mention, because we get this question a lot. There's that question, though, isn't most of the meat, protein, and products that are used in pet foods byproducts anyway? So why go about doing what we're doing to produce meat through microbial fermentation? So the reason is that even though a significant amount of those ingredients are byproduct, it still does require a lot of land, water, and energy to produce those as well. It still requires animal suffering with farm animal welfare. Those safety issues that we talked about up front don't go away, even with that type of cut of the meat. And on top of that, there was an interesting study that a couple of professors at UCLA put out a few years ago, peer-reviewed in a +1 journal. And their main objective of that study was to measure the environmental impact of meat consumption by America's dogs and cats, and even taking into account byproducts and other rendered meats and meals that are included in many pet food recipes. Their high-level conclusion was that if America's dogs and cats are their own country, their consumption of meat products alone would rank 5th in the world. So it's not an insignificant amount of meat protein that these animals are eating on a daily basis, and it still requires all those resources to create and make. And so that, for all those reasons, is why we're going about our business and trying to make a better pet food product that's wholly more responsible, and while ensuring that our beloved pets get the nutrition that they need.
And what's your background, and how did you get into this space?
Yeah, I guess in some ways I have no business being in this. My background's not in pet food. It's not in biotechnology. It's in advertising. I spent the last 25 years, and when I say that out loud, it scares the heck out of me. Getting old. 25 years working at a number of advertising agencies on some of the biggest brands in the world, on everything from diapers to motorcycles. And an account that actually brought me out to Boulder 10 years ago was the Burger King account. And at that time, they were trying to find a way to compete with fast food restaurants that maybe in the UK as well, but well known in the States, like Chipotle and Panera Bread, that were redefining what quality in fast food meant, and what the experience also meant to go to grab a bite for lunch or dinner. And that meant that we were working with a wholly different set of stakeholders on the client side. It wasn't just the CMO and marketing team, but it was their product development team and procurement, ingredient supply team, and a host of others, so that we can help them reimagine what the future burger and the future menu could look like. And that whole dialogue opened my eyes to the challenges that are attached to conventional agriculture, especially meat production and the procurement of a lot of those ingredients. I dangerously started to read on the side, just out of curiosity, books like Eating Animals and others. And long story short, I ultimately became a vegan working on Burger King.
Yeah.
Always made for some interesting client conversations, carting in those big trays of burgers during meeting breaks. I'm like, no, I'm not hungry. I'm like, what? You've been sitting here for like 8 hours?
Yeah, wow.
So that really set the stage for Bond in the sense that, obviously my own lifestyle changed, my own view on food. And then when my wife and I got our first dog a few years later, I wrestled with that tension of having to feed our dogs and especially our cats meat. We had no designs on making them vegan because, after doing quite a bit of homework, we concluded, and I think it's the right conclusion, that meat can be a beautiful thing for their sustenance and for their health. But just scratched at me every day. Like, could there be a better way to make these foods, to create these foods while mitigating all the things that we talked about at the beginning of the conversation? So at that time where I was stewing on it, companies like Perfect Day, Clara Foods, Memphis Meats were starting to come onto the scene and make some hay about the promise of making steak and chicken breast and milk and dairy through biotechnology. And I was fascinated by it. Bond aside, before it came to be, in this pet food discussion, I was just excited because I could have cheese again.
Yeah.
I really miss cheese. But the more that I started to learn about the fundamentals of the technology, I had the opportunity, because those companies were at such an early stage, that I could pick up the phone or send an email and have a conversation with Uma at Memphis Meats or Ryan at Perfect Day. New Harvest and Good Food Institute were just starting to also really build their group and their presence in the space. So plugged into those groups as well. And I quickly realized with some of those additional conversations that if somebody could crack the code for pet food, the path to commercialization could be relatively easier, primarily because for dogs and cats, you don't have to fully recapitulate the meat eating experience, right? It's not about the mouthfeel, the taste, the texture that has to be nailed, right, for the public to accept it for their own consumption. For dogs and cats, there's more flexibility there. A dog doesn't look at a chicken breast and say that's a chicken breast. They just know it tastes good. So it's more of a nutritional challenge than it is an experiential challenge in many respects. And that means there's an ability to avoid some of the costs that are associated with getting the structure right and perfect, right? And there's flexibility in its form. It doesn't have to be that round, juicy steak. It could be a dried concentrated powder that can blend into a recipe and then extruded into a kibble or freeze-dried, dehydrated, baked into a treat. And that realization really set the stage for the venture. Again, even though my background isn't in pet food or biotech, principally I knew if I could find a co-founder who had the chops and was seasoned in biotech, if I could pull together a rock star team of veterinary nutritionists to give us counsel on what the protein should look like from a nutritional standpoint, and other business leaders, then we could do something special. So it took me a year to find my co-founder, who was crazy enough to be just as excited about the prospect of this as I was, to come on board, and then the broader group, and then self-funded some experiments, produced initial batch of material, filed some provisional patents, packaged all that up, and went on the roadshow, and ultimately closed the seed round where we could start running faster. So that's essentially the journey, and how we got from that little kernel of an idea to a proper business and venture, and getting that off the ground.
And a common misconception is that obviously that people don't always know that dogs are omnivores, yes, so there's sometimes when I've been on these groups talking about vegan pet food that some people disagree. So what would you say about that when you have customers maybe speaking to you about that?
Yeah, it is possible for dogs to eat a plant-based diet. It's more challenging than eating meat because meat is more bioavailable. The dogs process it differently than plant-based proteins. And there are anti-nutritional factors that are attached to different legumes and other plant-based proteins that prevent the absorption of all the nutrients that are part of its goodness. So I guess the answer to that, possible but challenging. And so for that reason, and that's another reason why we're going about looking at biotechnology to make meat protein in a better, humane, more responsible way. Because if that could be an input into a recipe, it could be more complete than many of these plant-based proteins that are currently available on the market.
Okay, so if you're looking at amino acids, how many different amino acids are there compared to, say, dogs, humans, and cats?
Yeah, so at a high level, humans, you and me, we need 9 essential amino acids. We have to extract that from our food to get what we need to grow and, just go about our business every day, right? And thrive. Dogs need 10 and cats need 11, right? So, and the +1 for cats, aside from arginine, cysteine, lysine, and the like, is taurine. And that's typically something that you can only find in meat, although that is also often heavily supplemented with a synthetic version in many pet foods to make sure that the levels are where they need to be for cats to get that specification. So it's a little bit different in nuance for each species. As I said before, even with the challenges of meat and the same reasons why I went vegan, for dogs and cats, it can be more challenging to get the protein that's more bioavailable to sustain them in their diets long term. So that's, again, why I think what we're working towards is so beautiful, and others in the space as well, right? It's making sure that even with the values that we hold dear, we're not sacrificing their health and nutrition to satisfy, the things that we have a lot of conviction about.
Yeah. And talk to me about the process that you're working on at the moment. So you're basically extracting DNA genomes from say a chicken, and then working on recreating that into a fermentation process. Is that the gist of it? It'll be great to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, since my background's not in biotech, when I started talking about this to people, I'd massacre it. And like my CTO, my co-founder, was like, "Dude, what are you saying?"
High level was fine.
Yeah, but at a high level, so this is a process, as we talked about, that's been used for generations to make enzymes for cheese manufacture, as an example. And I'll go back to that in a minute. But what we do is we take a biopsy, actually in our case, a blood sample from a chicken. So no chickens harmed. We just went to, and that's another story, but we found a beautiful heritage chicken. We took a prick of blood from her. We isolated the skeletal muscle DNA. That's the building blocks of meat. We insert that DNA into a microbe, like a yeast, for example, and then we put that yeast with the chicken DNA into a brewing tank, a fermentation tank, feed it simple sugars, vitamins, minerals, and other natural ingredients in that nutrient broth. do some calibrations to the fermenter with the pressure and heat and everything else to make the yeast happy. And then as it grows, and when it reaches a certain density, we're able to pull it out, harvest it, gently dry it down. And we're left with a nice combination of yeast and chicken protein, the same identical chicken protein that you'd find in farm and field that could be used in pet food recipes. And it might sound a little bit weird in sci-fi, but in truth, when it talked about cheese and enzymes, this is something that has not only been used for a long while to make that ingredient, but it's something that many of us consume every day and we're not really aware of it, and that story is pretty simple. Back in the day, I think 30 years ago, the way that you'd make cheese is you'd have to harvest an enzyme that was found in the forestomach of the baby calf. So there was a lot of slaughter and farming to get that ingredient.
It was the animal rennet, wasn't it? That they were harvesting.
Yeah, that was the enzyme. Yep, from the baby calf, and that was incredibly resource intensive and energy intensive and human resource intensive to get that. As the demand for cheese, because that rennet, that enzyme helps separate the curds in the whey to create cheese, right? Mm. That became really, expensive over time to satisfy the people like me at that time, who love cheese in a growing population. And some scientists, looked at the process and protocols of brewing beer and other things, and they found that they could actually produce that same enzyme through a process where they take a biopsy, get a sample from the baby calf, isolate the DNA and the things that they need to basically express that enzyme, insert that DNA into a yeast or other fungi, put it in the brewing tank, and everything I said before, same mechanics. And then you're left with that input then that you could put into cheese making, but without all the farm animal welfare, the sustainability, land, water, energy, all those things. It's just more efficient and more cost effective. So same parallel process. We're just doing it slightly differently to make the things that can be something that's incredibly valuable to the pet food industry.
Yeah. And so in terms of timescale for that product, there's still a lot of research and development that you need to do to get there. What sort of timeline do you think you'll have till you get your first product? And then we'll talk about what you're doing in the interim at the moment.
Yeah. So we, just a few months ago, we produced a more significant batch of delicious chicken protein. It was a big milestone for us because we wanted to look at a few things on a larger scale. Number one, look at the unit economics, right? And how we could look at the different variables of production to get that cost down and scaled up over time. We also wanted to see how it would cook into a conventional recipe, how it tasted, and we all tasted it as well. And then fed it to some lucky dogs in Boulder, including my big girl that's passed out next to me right now, just to see what the uptake would be. Is it something they'd be interested in? And the good news is, even with the small sample, again, this was just a initial diagnostic, but went in and went out the dogs really well, processed well. They loved the taste. The nutritionals look really great. There's still some additional work that we need to do to make sure that all the essential amino acids are where they need to be. And that's, because, as the yeast is producing the meat protein, depending on all those variables with heat and pressure and nutrient broth, it may grow differently. So with some calibration, you can get the specifications where they need to be. But it gave us good baseline data then that we could build off of.
So this is your treat product that you've launched with the base product that you've got now.
No. So
okay, sorry, we're still talking about the
chicken is a little bit of a longer game. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And we're starting with chicken because it's the most consumed meat in the world for people and pets. So that's a natural beginning. But with all the things that I described, it will take, can't believe it's the end of 2020 already. How did that happen?
Yeah,
but
really fast.
By 2020, which is good for us, but by 2023, we will have a optimized chicken protein, that process of brewing it pretty much down to a science, where we have something that commercially has the beautiful specification that we're looking for, and the unit economics are within the range that would make sense to market a product that people would embrace. So and also work through the regulatory part of it, because we want to make sure that we're not just producing something that has the nutritional requirements on paper that a dog and a cat would need, but we want to do a more longitudinal study with them to make sure that we have the data that shows it's just as comparable or better than the meat proteins that are off the shelf today. So it is a little bit more of a long game with that. Still relatively quick. It's on the horizon. But what you mentioned before with the dog treat bar, that's an interim step that we're taking while all those meat proteins are in development, to begin to educate the public about the beauty and merits of proteins and products that are made through fermentation. So while the protein in this introductory product is an animal derived, it's made through a similar technique of fermentation. Think of a pure killed dried yeast. And again, that's just so that we can get people used to a different way of feeding and nutrition, different novel way of thinking about how they can get the requirements that they need, build that trust, build that community. And then when our more ambitious meat proteins are ready in a couple of years' time, we have an audience that we can convert, right? Because we built that bond, we built that relationship with them. And by the way, in the future, it won't just be treats. The bigger products portfolio that we're looking at is primary diets, what a dog and cat would eat day and night, because that's really where the win is, right? Not just in supplemental feeding.
Yeah. So, and in terms of the investors that you've got on board now with you, it'd be great to know about that. And I guess they're fully on board of this long game with the chicken alternative, and also the treats to encourage a loyal user base, if you like, of initial potential customers to go after with that product. And they're obviously, backing you on that at the moment.
Oh yeah. We've got a great group of investors. We have some of the most prominent alternative funds in the space: Lever VC, KBW Ventures, Prince Khalid bin Alawi's fund, Agronomics in your backyard. All of these and more. But these funds were also supporters of other well-known companies in the cellular agriculture and plant-based spaces, Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods, Memphis Meats, Geltor, right? A lot of companies that you and maybe some in your audience may be familiar with.
Yeah.
And they saw the opportunity in pet food to rethink it as well. They saw the same challenges. They believed in this kind of roadmap to start to build our presence and work through the fundamentals of our technology.
Yeah. I remember in the beginning of the chat, you were saying, you could pick up the phone to Memphis Meats, for example, perfect day. Is there still room for that sort of level of collaboration these days, do you think, between companies? Because ultimately, especially if they're doing a similar process to you on cultured meat, they will have the same challenges. and you could, partner up. Does that happen? Is that something that you want to encourage more?
That does happen. There are also organizations like New Harvest that are trying to, in Good Food Institute, right through, it's different today with COVID, right? But with different consortiums and conferences and bringing all those people together, building those relationships so that offline people can continue that and explore, ways that they could collaborate or share some learning that's not sensitive, but that can be meaningful to other companies. Because we're all in it for the same reason, right? Like part of it is to grow a healthy, profitable business and to benefit from that for all the stakeholders, but also to remove animals from the supply chain for all those bad things, that we discussed. So because of that, I think there is some collaboration. We are talking to a couple of those companies, or a couple of companies in the space too, just to see where we can perhaps use their ingredients and our foods over time.
Exactly. Because I was just thinking, like, all these companies probably don't need to reinvent the wheel. Like, there's probably one company that's a bit more ahead than the other, and there's a lot of things that you could do to use, especially potentially if they're in the same portfolio group as the main VC firms that you operate with as well.
Yeah, that's true. I would say that even though we're using similar technologies, we're all approaching it slightly differently, right? So, for example, and here goes my dog. She's rustling about, so you might hear. But even though I'm a giant fan of Memphis meats, and I can't wait to sink my teeth into one of their steaks one day, that whole process of working with cell tissue to create that is probably not, from an economic standpoint, the best application for pet food. Right.
And like you said about the texture, the structure was a key point. Yeah.
That's a lot of cost that's going into a finished product that for pet food would just be basically blended or ground into something else. So you don't have to do all that. And so for those reasons, even though there's a good universe of ventures that are working on different types of meat products, for what we're doing, a collaboration may not make sense, right? Because the cost structure isn't right, and others could, but nobody that I'm aware of, and I hope there are, by the way, like there are only right now a handful of companies in the pet food space that are visible and not in perhaps stealth mode, but we're the only ones that I'm aware of that are working with fermentation to produce meat protein. Others are working with cell tissue to make or to make mice meat or other novel proteins. But we all have our initial starting point in the race to bring to the world and to the market something.
Is mice meat a thing currently then in dog food? It's
not. No. I actually applaud it's a great company. We're big fans of them, called Because Animals. They are taking that approach under the guise that in nature, dogs and cats don't chase cows and pigs, right? They chase rodents, or at least cats especially do.
Yeah.
So they're working with a cell line that's been used for decades in the pharmaceutical industry, mice cell line to basically go through a cultured a process to make the mice meat protein for cats. That could be the foundation of their diets. So that's the tack that they're taking, and we're giant fans, but we're focused on conventional meat proteins, things that are perhaps more acculturated. People are used to kind of buying that on the label as a starting point for us.
Yeah. And you've just recently won a grant. I think, was it from the Colorado government state?
Yeah, it's really exciting. So we closed our seed last year, seed extension mid-year. Closed just under 2 million total there. And then a couple times a year in the state, happens in every state, perhaps not the same program, but same concept. State looks for really progressive companies and different verticals. So in Colorado, it's aerospace, and it's ag tech, and a couple of other consumer buckets that they look at, and they solicit applications for grants up to $250,000, and then they sift through them, they narrow it down, and then there's a pitch competition. Essentially, this year it was virtual, and yeah, I mean, I'll share this because it was kind of trippy for me. You know, we got on, it was my slot, I was the first to pitch that day, and I see all these like random faces popping up on the screen, and then there's one gentleman that had the name Jared. I'm like, that guy looks so familiar. I'm like, and then I heard somebody in the background say, "Hey, Governor, thanks for joining us." I'm like, oh no.
Oh, wow.
Governor's one of the judges. So anyway, yeah, went through that, and yeah, we were one of the companies that were awarded that $250,000 to help fuel our discovery and our growth, which is amazing to have the state supporting us. I think that also signals to me that with that kind of support, that even at that level in governance, that they see the opportunity for the state of something like bond in their future, which is really exciting.
Yeah, and in a way to also back a biotech company that isn't driven from Silicon Valley is also a good thing.
Yeah, and that's a really great thing about the Front Range. I don't know if you've ever been to Colorado.
No.
My wife and I, we moved out here 10 years ago, as I mentioned, and the whole plan from Chicago, and we always thought like 2 years, and I'll be at this ad agency in Boulder. We boomerang back to Chicago because we love Chicago so much.
Yeah, I've been to Chicago a few times, but not
it's a great city, right? But Colorado's really hard to leave. It just sinks its teeth into you. It's beautiful here. You've got nature in the background. When it comes to what we're doing as a startup, there's an amazing startup community in the Boulder area, especially when it comes to natural foods. A lot of brands like Izzy. I don't know if you've heard of Izzy. It's a beverage company.
Right.
Started here, obviously Boulder chips. There's like granola companies and popcorn companies and that have come out of this space. So with that, just culture of thinking about food in a forward-thinking way, it's just a great place to hang your hat from a lifestyle standpoint, and also just to have a great support system when you're starting up a business like ours.
Yeah, fantastic. So yeah, I wish you all the best of luck, and really thank you for coming on the show. I'll be intrigued to see the next couple of years of progress that you make, and when you launch your everyday product, and great that you've got the treat product out already. So yeah, thanks again, and wish you the best of luck.
Yeah, thanks, Anat. And I'll do like a shameless plug as well. We do have that dog treat bar, which is beautiful. That's available on our website right now. We're not shipping to the UK yet, but we will in the near future. And we just cut the price in half, and that will be from here on in on all those. We found a way to make them more efficiently. So for those pet parents out there, give us a try. Let us know what you think, and otherwise follow our journey if you're interested on our website and our Instagram and Facebook pages. We'd love to invite you in to do that.
Yep, and I'll make sure I'll put the links up for that. We have viewers. There will be viewers obviously in the US. So yeah, it's so you're shipping all throughout the US, I take it.
Yeah, just the contiguous US, 48 states, not Alaska or Hawaii yet, but we will. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So great. Thanks again, and speak to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Anat. Cheers.
Rich, bye. Bye.